All right.
There you go. You're good. Good.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, the Americans, the Allreds and the American Revolution, Part 1. Now, I imagine most of you think the American Revolution started on July 4th, 1776. But I've got a little surprise for you. As we go along, you're going to learn that there was actually a different date that the American Revolution started. And it started in North Carolina, not Philadelphia. Now, there were a lot of events, frustrations, wars, not wars, but battles, skirmishes that happened prior to 1776, and each one added on to the frustration level of the Americans, and each one made them want to start fighting for independence from England. And this started in 1764 with the Sugar Act. Basically, England wanted to make sure that the Americans could only buy sugar and molasses from English distributors. It was a lot cheaper to go to foreign distributors from the West Indies or even from France. England put such high taxes on those foreign importers that it became way too expensive. Americans could only afford to buy from England. The Stamp Act wasn't about stamps. It was about paper. Think how many times and ways paper could have been used to write down a bill, to write a letter, to wrap an envelope, just all the different ways paper could be used. Each piece of paper had a tax on it. The Boston Massacre. There were some British soldiers in Boston. Some Americans started throwing snowballs at them and heckling them, throwing rocks, throwing sticks. The soldiers' response was to open fire and murder, kill several of the Americans. Of course, the Battle of Allreds you learned about during our last Zoom. The Boston Tea Party. I know you've heard of that. In 1774, the first Continental Congress formed. In 1775, George Washington assumed command of the brand new Continental Army. 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord. In 1776, the Battle of Moores Creek. Now in North Carolina, following the Battle of Allreds, which was May 16th, 1771, Governor Tryon marched his troops through central North Carolina, looking for the regulators and demanding that they take an oath of allegiance. This oath was sworn before God that they would never again take up arms against the king, the crown, or any of the king's representatives. Now, if you remember from the last Zoom, there was over 400 men that were identified as regulators because they had signed petitions. Around 2,000 men showed up at the Battle of Allreds, but 6,400 men signed that oath of allegiance. took the oath of allegiance, swearing that they never again take up arms against the king. Now, some regulators refused to sign, refused to take the oath, and the penalty for refusing was sometimes instant death or being arrested and put on trial as a traitor and then death. So those men left North Carolina and moved west into the mountains and settled in what is now eastern Tennessee. Tryon left North Carolina in June of 1771, just a month after the Battle of Alamance. And his replacement was Josiah Martin. That's Josiah's portrait in the lower right-hand corner. At first, it appeared that he was going to be a good and reasonable governor, working to lower the taxes put on the citizens of North Carolina, working to correct the corrupt government in Orange County, but it didn't last. He took office in August of 1771. By 1773, he was already in fear of his life. He moved into a ship anchored off in the Cape Fear River, just off the banks of Wilmington. He called for his army, for his militia to gather. He sent out orders across North Carolina for certain men in each county to raise a militia, each man a militia of 50 soldiers, and to march towards Wilmington to protect him. And then once he was safe, he planned to march them across North Carolina. He was going to get the North Carolinians under control by force if necessary. As these different militia groups marched towards Wilmington, the patriots that lived in and around Wilmington started marching north to meet the Tory militia. They met in a swampy area in what is now Pender County at a creek named after the old widow that owned the land in the area, Old Widow Moore. This was Moore's Creek. There was only one very narrow bridge crossing the creek. The Tory militia was on the north side, the Patriots on the south. The Patriots had arrived first. They disassembled the bridge. You can see it from the picture. They left only the skeleton, the rails from the bridge. They took the planks off, and then they greased that skeleton so that anyone who tried to cross that bridge was on a very, very slippery pilings and could easily fall into the water. As the Tory militia tried to cross the bridge, the Patriots shot at them. The battle lasted about 3 minutes. An estimated 70 militia were killed. Some 850 were taken prisoner. Only one patriot was killed. Included with the militia was Seymour York. Seymour had been one of the men in Randolph County summoned to raise a militia. He couldn't refuse the summons. To refuse was to be branded a traitor and to face a traitor's death. Plus, Seymour had been one of the men who had sworn the oath of allegiance to never again raise arms against the crown. So he was a good citizen of the crown. He raised the militia as he was told. He marched towards Wilmington and was one of the 850 men who was captured at the end of the Battle of Moores Creek. Now, word of Moores Creek battle spread like wildfire. The governor had raised a militia that had fired on North Carolinians. The governor had planned to use this militia to stamp down any talk of independence. Word spread up to the northern colonies into South Carolina and Georgia. It was in the newspapers. An extract from one of the newspaper articles is there on your right, and it's included in the handout that you received. This inspired North Carolinians to organize and form a provincial congress. Provincial because it was the North Carolina province. They met in Halifax, and in one day, these men came together and agreed on the Halifax resolves. They resolved that the king and parliament were at war against the Americans, that the king had sent armies to fight them, that his warships had destroyed their property. When the Americans had begged for peace and liberty and safety, he ignored their petitions. For these reasons, Americans should declare themselves independent of the king, and that the Congress, the provincial Congress, ought to tell North Carolina delegates to the Continental Congress to join with the other delegates of the other colonies in declaring independence. It was a unanimous vote. North Carolina voted unanimously to be the first colony to fight for independence against England on October 12th, 1776. So for North Carolina, the American Revolution began on April 12th, 1776. This means that Seymour York was the first of our ancestors to fight in the War of Independence. And you're wondering, well, he was a York. What's that got to do with the Allreds? He was a cousin of the Allreds. Seymour's father was Jeremiah York. Jeremiah's sister, Anne, had married Solomon Allred. And of course, Solomon and Anne are the patriarchs of the American Allreds. If you could trace your lineage back to North Carolina and to Solomon Allred, who was born 1680 in England, Solomon had a wife, Anne York. Seymour York was her nephew. Therefore, Seymour York was our first ancestor who fought in the American Revolution. Now, following Moore's Creek Bridge battle and the Halifax resolves, things became relatively quiet in North Carolina. People kept moving in. North Carolina's population pretty much exploded. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of the map as it was when our Allred ancestors first arrived. The star indicates where they lived, which was it was wilderness. In 1752, the land was organized to form Orange County, where our ancestors lived. By 1779, Orange County had been divided and we were now in Randolph County. As the population grew, the different larger counties were divided to form smaller counties, which made it easier to form governments. Now, as I said, it was relatively calm from April 1776 until the fall of 1780. The American Revolution battles, most of them were happening in the northern colonies, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. Some were happening in South Carolina. But until the fall of 1780, except for a few skirmishes, North Carolina was relatively calm. This changed when a man named David Fanning focused on central North Carolina. He was a Tory colonel. His job, he was ordered by General Cornwallis to come to North Carolina and get it under control, to tamp down any talk of rebellion. He had a militia group with him. They ran through central North Carolina, the land where our Allred ancestors lived. They went through it like a buzzsaw. They were extremely cruel. They had absolutely no mercy. There were stories of them burning down houses with the family trapped inside. There were stories of ambushing men on the way to market. There were stories of rape. There were stories of child rape. And not all of these are stories. Some of them are documented by David Fanning himself. He kept a journal. He wrote in it almost every day. He explained in detail some of the things that he had done. Now remember, he was doing this to our Allred neighbors, to our Allred friends, and to our Allred ancestors. One story that David Fanning wrote in his journal about was the murder of William Doughty. And these are his words taken from his journal. He set out for Chatham, where he had learned there was a wedding to be held that day. The Doughty family had gathered to celebrate a wedding. There being but 5 of us, we immediately surrounded the house in full charge. I ordered them immediately out of the house, and 3 of my men went into the house and drove them all out one by one. And I caused them to stand in a row to examine them to see if I knew any of them that was bad men. I found one by the name of William Doughty, concealed upstairs. One of my men fired at him as he was running from the house. He received a ball in his shoulder. I then, having my pistols in my hands, discharged them, both at his breast, with which he fell, and that night expired. Now, David Fanning's only purpose for going to that house was because he knew there was a wedding. He knew there would be a gathering of people, and he was intent on murder. Those are his own words. Another story, also taken from David Fanning's journal, but repeated by one of our Allred cousins, Reverend Basil Allred, who wrote about his great-grandfather. William Allred was a patriot. He had been a regulator, and he was a patriot. He's in David Fanning's journal, very well known to Fanning, as supporting the War of Independence. Fanning wanted to find him and kill him. Fanning and some of his men rode up the hill to where William Allred lived. Someone in the family saw Fanning coming, warned William Allred and his son John. One of the men hid in the rafters of the house. The other one got on his horse and rode out to a large boulder out in the field. Now, this boulder is large enough for a man and a horse to hide behind. The map you see is from Google Maps. The arrow points to that boulder. It's large enough to show up on Google Maps. And if you ever come to North Carolina and go on the tour, I'll take you out there and you can see it for yourself. So one Allred, whether it was John or William, was hiding behind the boulder. The other one was up in the rafters of the house. They knew why David Fanning was there. He was there to kill them. The women and children were forced out of the house. Try to imagine the terror. Everybody knew David Fanning was there to kill them. The men searched the house, but they didn't find the one hiding in the rafters. They searched around the house, but they didn't think to look behind that boulder. Now, John and William were listening to their wives, their children, screaming in terror. Men, what would you do? If you showed yourself, it was certain death. Remember what happened to William Doughty? If you stayed hidden, there was a chance your women and children could be beaten and raped. What would you do? Well, John and William stayed hidden. They were very lucky that David Fanning gave up and left without harming the women and children. And they lived to see another day. So that many of us who descend from William and John are now alive today because David Fanning was unable to find them. A third story I'll tell you about is Andrew Hunter. Now, Andrew Hunter was a wagon driver, sort of like a truck driver today. On this particular day, his job was to haul a wagon load of liquor to market. Now, David Fanning had prepared a report and was getting ready to ride down to Charleston to meet up with General Cornwallis. But he had heard this wagon load of liquor was coming, and he says in his journal that he decided to stop it, take the liquor. Let me see, here the exact words was, I heard a number of wagons which was to proceed to market with liquor. I was about setting out for Charleston, but I concluded to have a frolic with my old friends before I departed. So he stopped the wagon, took Andrew Hunter prisoner, took the liquor, and the party began. As David Fanning and his men got drunk, they beat Andrew Hunter for the rest of the day and into the night. Finally, the men got so drunk that they passed out or went to sleep. Somehow Andrew Hunter had survived that beating. He managed to get loose from his ropes. He jumped on the nearest horse and made his escape. But someone saw him, and the chase was on. And the chase was especially serious because that horse belonged to David Fanning. And in that horse's saddlebags was David Fanning's report for General Cornwallis. A very valuable report if it fell into the hands of the Patriots. Fanning and his men chased Hunter through the woods. Hunter rode, stayed on that horse. Even though one of Fanning's men managed to get off 2 shots, they shot him twice.
Josh, they're talking about the Allreds, our ancestors in the Revolutionary War.
Thank you, Mike. Andrew Hunter had been beaten. He had been shot twice, but he managed to stay on that horse. Riding through the woods in the middle of the night with very, very angry militia chasing him, wanting to kill him, he came to a cliff overlooking Deep River. He couldn't turn around and go back. The militia was catching up to him, fully intent on killing him. He couldn't go to the right or left because the cliff was so steep. What to do? he jumped that horse off the cliff into the deep river. Somehow Andrew Hunter and the horse survived. Waiting on the other side of the river were some patriots who were organizing and gathering, getting ready to come rescue Andrew Hunter. They saw him jump off the cliff. They rescued him from the river. They rescued the horse from the river. They took Andrew Hunter about a half-mile upstream to the nearest Patriots farm. And that was the farm of William Allred. I have to surmise this because there's no written accounts, but I would imagine William Allred and his family did their very best to tend to Andrew Hunter's gunshot wounds and where he had been shot, where he'd been beaten. Some more of the Patriots took the horse and hid it away. David Fanning never did get his horse back. He later wrote in his journal that the horse was found, last he had heard of the horse, it was down near Charleston. Patriot stories say it was put up for auction at Charleston. You got to give the Patriots points for having a sense of humor. They knew David Fanning was going to Charleston to meet with General Cornwallis, and that's where they took his horse to put it up for auction. Sort of an in-your-face to David Fanning. I hope most of you have already watched this movie. If you haven't, or even if you have, I suggest you watch it again. The Patriot with Mel Gibson. The evil colonel in the movie, I think, was based on a composite between Bannister Tarleton, who was a Tory colonel stationed in South Carolina, and on David Fanning, who was the Tory colonel stationed in North Carolina. Each man was as evil as the other. Extremely evil. If you've watched the movie, if you're going to watch the movie, the things that happened in the movie are based on fact and really happened either by Bannister Tarleton or David Fanning. And in the movie is a scene where there's a carriage carrying General Cornwallis's 2 Great Danes and some wine and his papers. The Patriot forces led by Mel Gibson took the papers, the dogs, the wine. General Cornwallis never did get his dogs back. The same as David Fanning never got his horse back. But the Patriots had the records. Same as they had the records from David Fanning's horse. The records that had been in his saddlebags. Now, I like to think that that story was taken from the Andrew Hunter story with a little creative license. In real life, it was a horse. In the movie, it was 2 Great Danes. But an interesting twist on the story. So your homework assignment after the end of this Zoom meeting is to go to Netflix and see if you can find The Patriot and watch it. And then let me know what you think. Now, as I said earlier, except for David Fanning's exploits, it was relatively calm in North Carolina until October of 1780. General Cornwallis's Southern campaign was a disaster in South Carolina. He was pushed north into North Carolina. This map shows where some of the battles, not all, but some of the battles and skirmishes took place. The red star represents where our Allred family was living. So as you can see, they were smack dab in the middle of all the action. Here's another map showing the brown line shows the march of Cornwallis when he left South Carolina, all through North Carolina. The green line shows the General Nathaniel Greene, the American general, head of the Continental Army in the South, how he was chasing Cornwallis. Again, the yellow star shows where our Allred family lived, surrounded by all the battles and the skirmishes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some of the Allreds did join the Continental Army. Some of them did join the militia, but most remained at home. Of the ones that remained at home, these are the men that appear to have been old enough to have fought or be considered of age based on the 1779 tax record. William Allred, that you've already heard about. His son, William Jr., who was 49. William Sr., by the way, was about 66 years old. William Jr. was 49. His son, William, 15, and his son, John, who did join the Continental Army. Solomon had a son named Thomas. There's still a lot of people who like to call him Thomas Jr. This is the man who was in Tennessee and Alabama. But he wasn't a junior at all. He was the son of Solomon. There was my direct ancestor, John, and his son, John. And then there was Thomas, and three of his sons, James, William, and Elias. Now those ages are based on the 1779 tax record. And you may be thinking, well, there were more men. There were more Allred men than that. There was Joseph and Levi and Eli and several others. Why don't you have them listed? I listed just these because they are the names that appear on pay vouchers. Pay vouchers were a form of IOU whenever patriots needed supplies, needed shelter, needed food, needed ammunition, They issued pay vouchers, a form of IOU. We are purchasing this item from you in exchange for this amount of money. You can turn the IOUs in later after the war ends and be reimbursed. Whereas the British, when they came through, they simply took what they wanted, but the Americans were issuing the pay vouchers, the IOUs, planning to reimburse for any items, any goods that were needed. And I love it when my screen freezes up. There we go. This is a pay voucher issued on October 1st, 1783 to John Allred, John Allred Sr. Looks like he exhibited his coupon or his pay voucher and received payment. I'm going to guess that says £6, 12 shillings and 1 pence. It doesn't say what it was that John Allred provided. The two little holes, the first hole was put in when the pay voucher was issued to John Allred. The second hole was punched when John Allred turned the voucher in exchange for the money, in exchange for payment. That was an attempt to prevent fraud. So people couldn't just go home and write up their own pay voucher and turn it in. But how do we know which John Allred received this? It does say John Allred Sr., so that's a good clue. Remember, senior didn't necessarily mean father and son. Junior and senior could have simply meant one man was older. Two men had the exact same name. The older one was called senior, the younger one called junior, but they may not have even been related. In our case, we know they were. They were father and son. Senior The senior on this pay voucher tells us that the older man, John Allred, this is the man who died in 1792, was the recipient of this pay voucher. But this next pay voucher simply says John Allred. So how do we know which man really received this pay voucher? No clues on this one, such as junior or senior. And there were three possibilities. The John Sr. we just talked about, his son John, or even William's grandson, who was also named John. Now, yes, he was a teenager, but boys as young as 12 years old were participating in the militia, in the Home Guard, and sometimes in the Continental Army. So 14-year-old John could certainly have been old enough to have received that pay voucher. Here's another pay voucher for Thomas. On May 26, 1782, this may certify that a commissioner for the county, that's Randolph County, I have purchased from Thomas Allred I can make out forage. I'm not sure what that first word is. The holes kind of keep me from saying how many specie or milled dollars was to be paid for this forage. The first hole tells you that Thomas received his pay voucher. The second hole tells you that he turned it in for payment. But which Thomas was it? Was it the Thomas Allred, who a lot of you descend from? The man who died in 1810? Or was it Thomas Allred, who was the son of Solomon? The man who later showed up in Tennessee, and a lot of people still call Thomas Jr. Which Thomas received that pay voucher? Another pay voucher. This is for William Allred Sr. In this case, he sold 335 head of beef, 335 head of cattle. That's a lot of meat. He was trying to feed the Continental Army in North Carolina. The first hole tells you that William Allred Sr. received his pay voucher. The second hole tells you that he turned it in for payment. And you're thinking, well, William Allred Sr., that's easy to identify who received this pay voucher. But is it? I think we could discount the William Allred, who was the son of Thomas, and take a closer look at the William Allred, who was 66 years old, and his son, William Jr., who was 49 years old. But this is where it gets complicated. He had a son named William also. Now remember, if there's two Williams at the same time in the same place, one's older than the other. The older one is called senior, the younger one's called junior. So which one is the senior on the pay voucher? Was it the eldest William Allred, who was 66 years old? Was it his son, William Jr., who was 49 years old? If Junior and his son, William, had showed up to sell the meat, to sell the beef, then the William Allred, who was 49 years old, would have been considered the senior, and his son, the junior. Remember, senior and junior didn't necessarily mean father and son. It simply meant there were two men with the same name, and one was older than the other. Now, this is the easy pay voucher made out for Elias Allred. Elias was the son of Thomas. It's the only pay voucher for an Elias Allred. And really the only pay voucher that we can definitely say for sure we know who it belongs to. So for those of you that are interested in joining the Sons of the American Revolution or the Daughters of the American Revolution, and you have to submit your lineage and your documentation, and you decide you want to use one of the pay vouchers as your documentation, proving that your ancestor was a patriot, keep in mind that the registrars of these societies may ask you to prove that your ancestor was the man who received the pay voucher. Be prepared to answer some questions. How can you justify that William Allred Sr. was the eldest man, or his son, or his son? Be prepared to justify how you know that Thomas Allred was your ancestor and not his nephew. Now, I'm available if you need help with your lineage documents and help making an argument to prove that your ancestor was the recipient of one of those pay vouchers. There's 12 of them. I've put a link in the handout for where you can find them on Family Search in the North Carolina State Archives and on my website. So that concludes the presentation for tonight. The Americans Revolution, the Allreds and the American Revolution on the home front. The next Zoom will be November 16th. We'll be talking about the Allreds who served in the Continental Army and the Militia. And then on January 18th, we'll be talking about an Allred who was a Tory. In the meantime, you can go to my website, myallredfamily.com. That's a picture of the home page. The green arrow points to the Allreds in the American Revolution. Click on that. There's a lot of information, a lot of reports, and copies of those pay vouchers. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. And I'll open it up at this time for questions and answers and comments. If you do have a question, remember to unmute yourself so we can hear you talk.
That was some interesting stuff there, Linda. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a statement. Linda, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad you did. Thank you. Dottie, did you have something to say?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Fabulous. One word. I can tell you've done so much work, and I really, really, really appreciate it. I really do. This is phenomenal.
Well, I hope I didn't flub it over too much. My head is pounding with this migraine, and I don't know how many of you have ever had a migraine or taken meds for it, but it tends to make you fuzzy.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Like I told my daughter today, we were going through some communication stuff, and I told her, I says, you know, whatever we do, I have to take time to take a nap. If I don't get a nap after getting up at 5:30 this morning and having a Zoom meeting tonight on the Allreds, I have to be alert. If I don't get a nap, I'll be dumb. D-U-M-B, dumb, because my brain won't work. So I totally
Definitely.
understand. Yes, ma'am.
Well, even though our Allreds, the majority of them stayed at home, I hope I was able to explain that they weren't just living the life of Riley in peace and comfort. They were surrounded by a lot of violence during the American Revolution.
Linda, I do have a little bit of a question. In the North Carolina records, someplace, is it possible to find out who owned enough land to have that many cattle?
They all did.
Oh, great. That doesn't help us.
They all did. They all owned several hundred acres of land. So they all could easily have had that many cattle, that many head of cattle. In the William Allred case, to complicate things, they all lived together.
Yeah, I was figuring it'd be worse. And I have something else to say. The migraine headaches are an Allred curse. I know everybody in my family that came down from an Allred has had migraines, and they're still getting them.
Well, I'm hoping that an eye doctor will be able to help me a little bit with some of it. I know I need better glasses, and I think there's a couple of surgeries scheduled, maybe for some cataracts and other things. So maybe that will help ease off some of it. But a lot of it is just like you said, it's life. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Hey, Linda?
Yes.
I was looking at Mike Kidd's ancestry chart for the Allreds.
Uh-huh.
And I was curious, I see the Solomon Allred, and is there a Elizabeth Diffie? Is that name sound familiar for like a William Allred Jr.?
Yes. Elizabeth Diffie married your ancestor, William Allred. This is the William Allred I had listed on there as William Jr.
Okay.
He died in 1825. So in the scheme of things, you have Solomon, who was born in England in 1680, and then his son, William, and then his son, William. That's the one who married Elizabeth Diffie. Unfortunately, I've lost count how many family trees I've looked at that have Elizabeth Diffie married to several different Allred men at the same time, giving birth to their children all at the same time. She was a very talented lady. But in truth, she was only married to William Diffie. And they're buried together at the Billy Trogdon Cemetery.
So I guess I didn't pick up on your William Allred that you listed as his father. I guess I've never heard you say who he was married to.
We don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it.
Although online you might see other names attached to him, but in truth, nobody knows.
Got it. Makes sense.
Other questions?
Where was the York land in relation to the Allred land? Curious, in North Carolina.
In Randolph County, the Allred land centered around Deep River and Sandy Creek area. Or if you're looking on the map, in the Cedar Falls, Franklinville area.
Mm-hmm.
The York land was up where Sandy Creek Baptist Church. In that area, just a little bit, just a few miles north. Matter of fact, Seymour York gave the land that the church was built on.
Wow. I just found it interesting that William Allred and William Trogdon lived across the river from each other in Maryland, and it looks like they're almost in identical spots on Deep River across from each other.
Yeah. Back then, you tended to travel in groups.
Got it.
And a lot of times those groups were related by marriage. Now going back to the pay vouchers, the ones for Thomas Allred, for any of you who might be descended from him and wanting to use that as your documentation that your ancestor was a patriot, I think I can give you a really good argument to prove that the Thomas Allred that received that pay voucher was the Thomas Allred who died in 1810, who is the ancestor of a lot of the folks. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with me after this, and I'll be glad to discuss it with you and help you with your lineage. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm related to Laura Allred. I'm the sister, and she gets migraines. So it was really, and she's listening right now. Interesting to hear that about the physical connection through the Allreds. Is there any connection of telepathy? I feel I am that. My father was that. He had a uncle or great uncle who was that. My father is Joe Allred, was all Joe Allred. Uncle Robert was Joe Allred's uncle. So
he's had unexplained things happen.
Well, uncle, so I guess you would be a great uncle. Uncle Robert was my father's uncle. Uncle Robert was in Greensboro, and he would help the Greensboro Police Department figure out murders and other things. And he would sit outside the JCPenney, and people would pay him to tell their futures.
Oh, fun.
And so maybe my sister can help me. It was our great uncle, yeah. And let's see. And my father was a businessman. I feel like he was very telepathic. And I am in that. That's the work I do in certain ways. So I'm using the skills from that side of the family.
Fun story. I would love to add that to my website. I have family histories and family stories on there. That would be a fun addition. But yes, I've had things happen to me in doing research. I don't know why, I don't know how, and it doesn't happen all the time. But I can be really focused in on whatever ancestor I'm doing research on at the time, and be in an archive or a library that I've never been in before, and go immediately to the record or the book that I need to look at. And I've had it happen in cemeteries that I've never been to before, and I'm looking for a specific grave, and I'll walk right to it. So I don't know why, I don't know how. Several of the people who are on here now have been with me on trips and watched me do it. And it only happens if I'm really concentrating. Alice Potmeyer was with me on a trip to the Pennsylvania Historic Society in Philadelphia. And of course, I was looking at Allreds. There's a huge collection there called the Pemberton Collection. I think it's some 50 linear feet of documents. I had heard stories about one particular document that I really wanted to get my hands on. I mean, 50 linear feet of documents can take you several weeks to read through. I went to it almost immediately when we walked into the archives. I don't think we were there more than 20 or 30 minutes. And I had already found it. And that was the 1695 letter that our Solomon Allred, or his father John, wrote to Phineas Pemberton that proved our Allreds came from England and settled in Pennsylvania. I don't know how I found it, but I did. And of course, then there was a whole group of us and we all started screaming and yelling and almost got tossed out of the archives. But you know, that was a fun day. So I don't know if it's telepathic or just the ancestors are talking to me or just good luck. But yeah, I've had things happen.
Yeah. So our great uncle Robert's father was Joseph Allred. My father was a junior. So just to give you that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, after this is over, we need to get together and talk about that and maybe pull together a story for the website.
That would be great. That would be great. Yeah. Thank you.
That would be fun. Yeah. Kay Allred in Georgia wants to know which Joseph. Do you know when he was born and died or where he lived?
Let me see if Laurie is she knows all this stuff. Let's see.
Okay. Well, why don't I put you together with Kay after the meeting and y'all can swap some emails and maybe it'll turn out that y'all have a common ancestor.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions about the American Revolution and the Homefront? Gosh, you're so quiet. I either did a spectacular job and answered all your questions, or you're just mind boggled and don't know what to say.
No, actually, I do have another. I want to talk to you more, though, because I just found a pedigree chart from my Uncle Joseph Hanson, who was married to an Allred. And I do have more on William Allred and Elizabeth Thrasher. And William Allred's dad was Thomas, married to Elizabeth Twiggs. So I may be able to do that for a Patriot on the American Revolution, documenting Thomas. I have his date of birth, but I don't have his, it says 1809 he died. So 1809, 1810 is pretty close.
Well, 1809, he wrote his will, but it wasn't probated until 1810.
So that could be my Patriot.
That's your Patriot.
There it is. And I can trace William and Isaac easy. I already have all that.
Well, there you go.
Oh my gosh. I'll get with you later, Linda.
Yeah, after this is over, we'll get together and I'll help you put it together for your registrar, for your DAR.
Oh, this is exciting. So I'll talk to you in a little while. Get over your migraine. I know how horrible they are.
They're not any fun, that's for sure.
No, they aren't. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Kay Allred out said he Elias Allred has already been documented. Yes. The Elias Allred that you saw on the pay voucher is the same man who moved to Hall County, Georgia, and that's where he's buried. Yes, he is documented. He was a Continental soldier, Continental Army. And we have his records, his pension application that describes his service. And we'll be going over that in the next Zoom meeting. So yes, that Elias is already documented. But the pay voucher could be used as additional documentation.
Linda, this is Dottie. Thank you.
Hey, Dottie.
Thank you for that. You know, I come from Elias, the Elias line.
Yes.
Also, North Georgia. Hi, Kay. I appreciate that information because I had no other links or proof to that. So I appreciate that information.
Yes, we'll be talking about his pension application and his service in the next Zoom. And then in the meantime, you have one of his pay voucher, the only one that's got his name on it.
That's beautiful.
And we know it was him because he was the only Elias Allred alive at that time.
That is great. Kay, if you don't mind, I would love for you to have my email address. Can you send it to her?
Yes.
Linda, so that
Yes.
we can correspond, because I have no other connections left in North Georgia. All of my relatives up there that I know of have passed. All of
I
them.
will definitely put you together with Kay.
Okay, thank you. I would love to do that. I appreciate it. We love you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Any other questions or comments?
Take care of yourself.
Oh yeah, you know, more Tylenol and a good night's sleep.
Yeah, I get the migraines from both sides of my family, but they subsided when I was in my mid to late 50s. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, yeah, I wish mine would, but they seem to be getting worse and worse instead of subsiding. So
Thank you, Linda.
you're very welcome.
That was marvelous, as usual.
You're very welcome, Flossie. I'm glad you could attend.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't miss. It was great. Thanks.
Tell Jennifer I said hey.
I will. I will. I think she's listening in.
Oh, good. And
We miss you.
I see Stephanie's on here too. So we got the whole family.
Yeah, Stephanie's there. My Kevin, our son from Japan that lives in Japan, is here too. So
oh, wonderful.
Listening.
Wonderful.
Oh, very interesting call. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was great. We'll look forward to the next one.
Well, good.
I was hoping I'd be back there to see you before this, but you know, life happens.
Oh yeah. Tell me about it. Tell me about it.
Come say hi, Jen. She won't say hi.
Hi, Jen.
Oh, this is Jen. Hi, Jen. How do I see?
You don't.
Oh, I was going to turn you so she could see, but she ran past. So
that's okay. We heard her.
All right. We'll see you guys.
And I see Brandon has a lap full of sugar that hasn't gone to bed yet. What time's bedtime?
Charlotte's, she just came in here and said, Dad, you let me stay up too late. So I think it's already past your bedtime, isn't it? Can you say good night, everybody?
Night, night, sweetheart.
Linda, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. And I'm going to stop the meeting unless there's any other questions.